listening to the music of the composer who has been called the greatest musical genius who ever lived. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and he brought to perfection the classic music of the 18th century. His short life of only 35 years began here in the city of Salzburg, Austria. Here in the winter of 1756, Mozart was born. And here in this famous center of music, his remarkable career began. What can we find in Salzburg today to help us understand Mozart and his music? The house where he was born is a famous landmark in the history of music. When we go inside, we step back in a way to the 18th century. Here the boy Mozart spent many happy years with his younger sister and his parents. On the piano, young Wolfgang practiced lessons taught by his father, a musician. He was probably the favorite of the family, a brilliant, gifted boy. He learned to play the piano at 3, and by 5 he was composing. At 6, he wrote this minuet in F. Word of his amazing skill soon spread through Salzburg. His father decided to take the boy on a concert tour. They left Salzburg to visit other cities of Europe. We can imagine the wonder of the wide-eyed boy as he saw the great palaces and other attractions in the cities of 18th century Europe. The trip included Vienna, one of the important centers of music education. In the royal palace of the Habsburgs, young Wolfgang met Queen Maria Theresa. She kissed him after his concert because she was so impressed with his performance. Everywhere he went, he was acclaimed as the boy genius. So successful was this tour that in 1768, when Mozart was 13, he and his father set off again, this time to Italy. The Italian tour, which began at Verona, was an important part of Mozart's musical education. Cities such as Bologna were centers of 18th century Italian music. Papa Mozart described it as the dwelling place of many artists and learned men. At the Franciscan church, the boy met Padre Martini, the chapel master, who was a leading authority on church music. The Italian journey included a visit to Rome. At St. Peter's, the boy saw some of the wonders of this religious center. We can imagine the boy Mozart watching the splendid ceremonies during Easter week in Rome. Perhaps these impressions were responsible for the depth of feeling which Mozart later expressed in his final masterpiece, the Requiem Mass. While he was in Rome, Mozart visited the Vatican. Inside the great palace of the popes, the boy attended ceremonies in the famous Sistine Chapel. But this was only one of his great musical experiences in Italy. There was another kind of music that Mozart became acquainted with as he continued his travels in Italy. Here, under blue skies and a warm Italian sun, Mozart heard the captivating melodies of Italian opera. In Milan, in the famed La Scala Opera House, Mozart's own operas were later introduced to Italian audiences. It may have been on this Italian tour that Mozart caught the flavor of Italian music. For he was the first, as it was said, to make the instruments sing, to give his music a graceful, lyrical quality. In Naples, young Mozart discovered the world of opera music. In this city was the famous San Carlo, home of Italian opera. Mozart later wrote operas which brought this form of music to high perfection. Don Giovanni is such a classic. Let's listen to an aria from Don Giovanni, in this scene with Zerlina and Mazzetto. From the musical world of Italy, Mozart and his father returned to Salzburg. Here Mozart began the final stage of his development into one of the greatest of composers. Here his patron was the Archbishop of Salzburg. For 6 years, Mozart was court composer to the Archbishop. But after a violent quarrel with his patron, he left Salzburg. Once more, the young composer traveled. Munich, Paris, Mannheim. Finally, he settled in Vienna, there to spend the rest of his life. In this church in Vienna, he was married. In Vienna, too, he enjoyed the friendship of Haydn, another master composer. And here in Vienna, he composed the bulk of his works. How shall we describe his music? It is music that reflects the 18th century aristocracy in Europe. It is music that expresses a way of life that was elegant, formal, and charming. It is music that recreates for us an untroubled world, a world that resisted change. And in this world moved the kind of people for whom Mozart wrote his music. The beautifully costumed men and women of the 18th century. That century was an age of princes and kings. Their splendid gardens and palaces were designed in the classic tradition of ancient Greece and Rome. It was an age of classic art. And Mozart's music, like classic architecture, stressed form and balanced design. Much of this music, too, was chamber music. Let's step inside an 18th century drawing room. The music we hear is one of Mozart's most familiar piano sonatas. And And so Mozart's music depicts the traditions of the 18th century. And yet, although he was acclaimed a great composer, there was no market for his compositions. However, his personal disappointments and tragedies never affected the spirit of his music. While he lived in Vienna, he was constantly in debt. He moved from house to house, often unable to pay his bills. But wherever he lived, he poured out his music, the music of his mature years. From Mozart's brilliant mind and prolific pen, there continued to come a torrent of masterpieces. Among them, one of the greatest of his symphonies. It is the Symphony Number 40 in G minor, one of the more than 600 compositions which he wrote in his short lifetime. He was truly a master composer. His music is the flawless music of the elegant 18th century. It is music in the classic tradition, music of classic form and balance. Few composers have equaled the perfection of Mozart's music. He has been called the greatest musical genius who ever lived.